On Sunday, September 23rd, we continued our Power Sermon series. James 5:16 lets us know that the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. We looked at the idea of the prerequisite of prayer. Before we can do anything, we must pray. A prerequisite defines something that is required beforehand. Many of us thought about course catalogs in school. English 202 had a prerequisite of a passing grade of C or better in English 101. The prerequisite for doing any work for Christ is prayer. Our focus scripture was Mark 9:28 through 29. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" He replied, "This kind can only come out by prayer." We began at verse 14. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with him about?" he asked. Our first point was no prayer leads to chaos. Jesus, Peter, James, and John found the other disciples in a very chaotic setting. They were surrounded by a large crowd and teachers of the law arguing with them. We'll discuss what caused this arguing coming up. We also observed something else here. Did you notice the response of the people when they saw Jesus? They were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. They were filled with awe, attitudes of worship, but Jesus did not acknowledge them. All he saw was the chaos. Chaos interferes with worship. A lack of prayer can ruin a great opportunity for worship. We saw our second point in verses 17 and 18. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. When it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." Our second point was no prayer leads to failure. The man knew exactly who to come to for help. He came to Jesus. When Jesus was not there, he did not lose hope because the empowered people of Jesus were there, the disciples. He knew that coming to the empowered people of Jesus was just like coming to Jesus himself. Unfortunately, the empowered people of Jesus failed. We saw our third point in verses 22b through 24. "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus. "Everything is possible for him who believes." Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." Our third point was no prayer leads to doubting. The man's request went from specific to a general if. He specifically asked the disciples to drive out the evil spirit, but he asked Jesus if he could do anything. The man wasn't the only one who began to doubt. The large crowd doubted as well, which led to the chaotic setting. When they argued, the idea was they were challenging, debating, and strongly doubting that they were truly empowered by Jesus. A lack of prayer causes others to doubt as well. We now arrive at our focus scripture, verses 28 and 29. The disciples don't appear to be sure of themselves either. Here's where the blessing comes in. Jesus didn't say they could not have done it. Instead, he tells them only by prayer. If they would have prayed, then they would have done it. This leads us to believe that the disciples did not pray before they attempted to cast out the evil spirit. A lack of prayer led to chaos, failure, and doubting. Prayer prevents chaos, failure, and doubting. Remember, Jesus didn't say they couldn't have, but if they prayed, then they would have. There is power in prayer. Just remember, prayer is the prerequisite for all things. God bless you and be encouraged in the power of prayer.